Hey guys, welcome back to Vince-Vell Custom. So today I'm going to go over how to fill up pinholes on a kit or a statue. Now, a lot of statues that you get, whether it's a kit, a garage kit, pre-painted statues, whenever they cast it up, sometimes you get holes and pinholes. But that gets hidden and covered up when you use primers, stuff like filler primer. But sometimes even when you use primers, you're going to get pinholes that can't get filled in. Now, I'm going to show you a couple ways of doing this. Now, if you have a smooth area, which I'm kind of lucky on this specific item with all the little pinholes, it's smooth, so I can get away with what I'm doing. But if you have an item that's got a lot of detail and it's got a lot of pinholes in that detail, that becomes more of a headache. That's where you got to kind of, use some sculpting skills, use some different types of putties you might have, and kind of get all those holes filled in. And sometimes if it's really, really bad, it's just a lost cause unless you want to resculpt the whole entire area. But as you can see at this Underworld kit I have, after I started priming it, I started getting all these little tiny pinholes. Now, I didn't see it when I primed it in with the black. I kind of caught it with a little bit of a light in the garage, and I was like, oh crap, I got a lot of pinholes. Now, it's really not that hard to really fix this up. So what I did is I used Duplicolor Filler Primer, and I was able to see where the holes are. Now, with this, what I do is I have this tool here, which is like a sculpting tool. It's like a little rubber tip here. And this is a really cool tool if you want to sculpt with, if you're using any kind of clays, Aves, magic sculpt, all kinds of stuff. But I like this tool as my tool for applying Tamiya Putty, which is the basic gray. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a little bit closer and show you how this stuff works great with this, I guess you could call it the rubber brush, and how I'm able to apply it like this. Instead of putting it on your finger and smushing on, which you can, I kind of got used to this tool. So let me set up. I'm going to show you how we fill this in. And then what the next step after that is once I fill it all in, I go and I sand it down. But then sometimes those holes kind of come back. But then I use filler primer again. And it's kind of like a little process to keep going until it's all filled in. Yeah, you can sit there and you can try to fill in every little tiny hole, but that'll just drive you nuts. And it's stuff that I've worked in the past where this is kind of my little setup and my little way of filling up the pinholes. So we'll get set up, I'll show you how I work that, and we'll go from there. Okay, we're going to start the process of filling up the pinholes. Now, whenever I open up this cap, this stuff dries pretty fast. So when you kind of put it into the thing, it's kind of like already cakey and it falls off. You want to get down to the stuff that's kind of wet and still. So then what I do is I kind of do this. Just start putting it apart. And this kind of like acts like a spackle type thing. And starts, pushing it into the holes a little bit. And you kind of just keep getting it around and pushing it. And then it starts drying up on the tip here, right? But the cool thing about this putty is it just comes right off. And then you go in here, get some more, and you start working that there. And this putty sort of dries fairly fast. It doesn't really take too long. But the thicker you put it on, the more it'll, like if you put a big glop and you let it sit, underneath is still a little wet. But by doing it this way, you're kind of drying it a little bit. And as you saw, it starts to pull up the primer a little bit as well. That's because the, reaction a little bit. But that's not a big deal because it's all going to get sanded down anyway to get rid of those holes. So... And then basically I just go throughout the process, find all the little holes, get in there. Now it starts getting cakey and cracked up in the tube piece, and you gotta kind of, get rid of it. Now I know it's kind of wasting it, but that's just the way this stuff works. But I really do like this stuff because it's very sandable and very easy. But this stuff isn't good for like huge cracks. Like if there's like a big indentation, if you keep filling it up, this stuff gets kind of cakey and chalky. So you don't really want to use this for bigger cracks. You want to use it for like pinholes, little tiny scratches, hairline type stuff, and just kind of gets in there and it gets it around. Now this stuff is going to take a little while to dry. I want to make sure I get all my little pinholes, make sure I get everything. So I'll pretty much get this up in the light, make sure I didn't miss anything, And then the next step is kind of sanding it all down. Then after sanding it down, we prime it, and then we make sure we get all the little pieces and pinholes gone. Now I know it's it's tedious work, but this is how I kind of patch up pinholes. But let's see, there was a little piece I think underneath the foot. Okay, like right here, there's like some bubbles, and there's a little tiny piece right here. Let's see, as you can kind of see the little bubble. If I was to fill this up with this putty, and then when you put this and you hit it into the base back and forth, that'll start cracking. Because this stuff is kind of like more of a chalk, but it's good for filling up this little stuff. Now, actually looking here, I actually see there's a whole bunch of pinholes going along the leg in here now. So I got to fill those in as well. So I'll get these all filled in. We'll come back. I'll show you how I sand it all down. Then we prime it and we do it. And we keep going until we're just done and everything's filled up. Alright, next step is pretty much sanding it down, and I like to use these 3M sandpapers. This is like basically a gray version compared to the blue version. You could get the blue at like Home Depots and stuff. This I ordered online. It's basically the same thing, but it seems that the grays go like lose their sanding appeal faster than the blues do. I don't know why, but it's just what I found out online. But I guess it's the pro grade, it's pro, and it's a little bit more expensive and lasts longer. But as you can see, older pieces, they're really good though, because when you keep using them, they get softer, but they also get finer. So it's also good for like fine tuning and smoothing out some areas. But this one here is pretty much still new, and it's got some really good rough texture still. This one right here is still brand new in the box. I don't really even need it. But at this point, since it's pretty rough, all I start to do is I just pretty much start sanding it down. And what happens is when you start sanding this down, the dust also helps fill in the little hole. So if you sort of miss the hole, the filler primer and the putty is also help filling in the holes a little bit. So you don't go crazy sanding it, just kind of, just let it work, let the sandpaper do its thing. And you just kind of sand it all up and get it filled in. As you can see, as I was looking in the lights, I found some more issues here and there. And so as this process goes on, I just pretty much keep sanding it all down. Some of it still might be a little bit wet there, because I'm just kind of showing you guys how it worked in the video. It's pretty dusty. You don't want to breathe this stuff in when you sand it down, so you want to definitely use a mask. The Tamiya putty, I think you can only really find online. A lot of hobby stores don't carry it anymore. So I always order mine online on eBay. You can find guys selling like 3 tubes together for like a certain price, and it just comes from Japan. I guess it's got something in there that a lot of hobby stores can't carry in the US anymore. I don't know. But there's other types of putties though that do the same thing. So if you have other types of putties that you like better, you can use those. But this is kind of like what I fell into throughout my years, and it's kind of like what I like to use. But as I start sanding it down, I start seeing that the holes are getting filled in. I'm not really seeing them that much anymore. But once I get it sanded down, I'll come back and I'll show you what happens when we prime it again. A lot of these holes might be there still, or they might start filling it up. And we just start kind of slowly getting rid of them. But when if you start getting any little holes in like this type of areas and all that stuff, that's where you got to sit there and take your time and fill them in, because if you over sand it, you lose all this detail. And we don't want to use filler primer in here either, because then we lose this detail. But on the smooth stuff with the legs, muscles, the ass cheeks, it's all smooth, so you can get away with doing this process. So I'll finish sanding it up, and we'll come back and I'll show you what happens when we prime it up. Okay, so before I go and prime it up again, I just wanted to show you what happens when you sand it all down. It looks very disgusting, it's nasty, it just looks like a wreck. But when you go back and you prime it, what happens is when you sand it down, the filler primer, the Tamiya putty kind of get dusty, and they kind of help fill in those little tiny pinholes. And then when you go and you prime it again, it starts to seal it all together. And this is kind of like my best option I found to get all these pinholes filled in, because once you fill prime it again, or you primer or whatever, it seals it in. Then when you paint again, that seals it in more. So even though this little tiny pinhole's got like basically dust fill in there, it works. It seals it. You don't have to worry about it coming out and stuff. That's why I say if you use this stuff for a bigger crack, indentation, or bubble, that's when you run into problems. That's where you need more of like an A's or Magic Sculpt and stuff like that. But this is kind of like what works out for me, and this is how I do it all. So I'm gonna go prime it up, let her dry. We'll come back. Any other little tiny pinholes that we've missed, we fill those in, and then we're good to go. Okay, guys. So as you saw, the process is basically patching it up with some kind of a putty, and then priming it, and then making sure it's all smooth and you're not missing anything, and then keep doing the process. And that's pretty much. I got all the holes pretty much filled in. There's a couple, like 1, 2, or 3. There's like one here. There's some more there. But at this point, she's pretty much almost ready to be painted up because I have all the other stuff done. All I have to do is get the arms attached. But all I have to do is just a little tiny putty here, and there, sand that down, and then I can start painting, because this Tamiya putty works very well where you can actually paint onto it and there's no problems. You don't have to actually, some putties you have to put on the statue and you have to prime the putty for paint to stick to it. This stuff actually, if you have a pre-painted statue and you have a little tiny nick, you can use the putty, fill it, sand it, and then touch it up, and you're good to go. So that's why I like to use the Tamiya basic grade putty. And that's what I use to fill up all my pinholes on statues, whether it's a pre-paint, garage kit, just depends on what it is. So hopefully it helped you guys out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.